can I ask you all to warmly welcome Michael Portillo?
Well, thank you, John, for a very special sort of introduction, and certainly for making it so painfully clear to everyone here that I'm a man with an enormous political future behind me. You didn't actually mention some of the high offices that I achieved, because at one time I was a future Prime Minister, and I'm now a former future Prime Minister. We're rather a large number in British politics, and we formed ourselves into a little club of former future Prime Ministers. Very pleased to be able to tell you today that we just welcomed as a new member Mr. David Miliband. And personally, I'm looking forward to welcoming Mr. Ed Miliband as well. But may I say how grateful I am to Newbubbles, actually how pathetically grateful I am to Newbubbles for plucking me from the obscurity in which I presently reside and giving me an opportunity to be here today. Because, I mean, had you invited me 15 years ago, my name was habitually in headlines. But you know, my name has been in the headline only once in the last decade. Running up to the last general election, there was some speculation that a cabinet minister might lose his or her seat at the general election, and the headline appeared, "Will there be a Portillo moment at this general election?" Now, for those of you who don't know what that means, it's journalistic shorthand for a man eating a bucket full of shit in public. Because in the 1997 general election, in the full glare of national publicity, I lost my seat in Parliament, lost my ministerial job, lost my chance of leading the Conservative Party, all gone in one humiliating moment. And that moment was subsequently voted by Channel 4 viewers and Observer readers their third favourite moment of the 20th century. Indeed, in that particular poll, I narrowly beat the assassination of President Ceausescu into fourth place, an achievement of which I am, I think, justly proud. And some people have asked me, you know, how was it that your political career ended in disaster? And happy to take you into my confidence in this intimate gathering. I used to have a seat in North London, and I used to go there on a Saturday to a fete or a bazaar or something like that. Standing by the tombola is a lady. She says, "Will you send me a signed photograph of yourself, please?" Which seemed to be an eminently reasonable and understandable request. But to tell you the truth, I forgot all about it, and I wasn't back in my ministerial office until the following Thursday, because I used to work quite a short week, you know, sort of John Prescott of my day. And when I got into the office, there was a letter lying open. It said, "I met you at the tombola, please send me a photograph." Signed Enid Snooks, and in brackets she'd written horseface. Don't titter, don't titter. I was moved. I thought, this is a wonderful lady with a self-deprecating sense of humour. It's by way of a challenge to me to see if I can rise to the occasion. Can I show a sense of humour? And fortuitously, by the most amazing chance, I had a signed photograph of myself handy, and I wrote on it to my very dear horseface, with very best wishes, Michael Portillo, popped it into the tasteful matching frame that a Michael Portillo photograph comes in. Sent it off to Mrs. Snooks, felt great about the whole thing. Later that day, my personal assistant came in. She said, "Did you see that letter from Mrs. Snooks?" I said, "I did. Wasn't it marvellous?" She said, "Oh, that's great. I thought you wouldn't even remember who Mrs. Snooks was. I trust that it was helpful that I wrote horseface after her name in brackets." So I guess that pretty much explains my political career to you. Now, first of all, is the austerity going to last? Absolutely it is. The figures that were produced in the budget yesterday show projections for the economy through to the year 2017. By all recent precedents, these figures will prove to be too optimistic, but they are showing an economy in 2017 which is 2 or 3 percentage points below the peak that the economy reached in 2007, 2008. So we've got a decade in which we have worse than no growth. And as you know, since the general election, I think we've had 1 percentage point of growth. So we're absolutely flatlining. Second thing to say, perhaps, is the reason the coalition came together was that in the hours following the inconclusive general election result of 2010, civil servants for the first time have the chance of having a transparent conversation with the Liberal Democrats and with the Conservatives. And the civil servants think that the economy is teetering on the brink of disaster. In particular, that the markets are about to rebel and will charge much higher rates of interest to the British government for its borrowings. And this convinces the Conservatives, on the one hand, not to try and go it alone in a minority government, which would be unstable and would be seeking another chance for an election. And it convinces the Liberal Democrats to go for a bigger dose of austerity than was being practiced by the Labour Party. And the reason I tell you this, it may seem like history, is that it is completely relevant today. The coalition still believes that the economy is teetering on the brink of disaster. And indeed, the situation is substantially worse than it was in 2010, because since then, we've had only 1% growth in the economy, and each year we've been borrowing roughly 10 percentage points of the size of our GDP, and so we are piling on the size of the national debt. We are making a journey between a national debt that's 60% of GDP towards a national debt that's 100% of GDP. The difference is between a tolerable situation as far as the markets are concerned and one that causes them immense anxiety. There is going to be no plan B. If the Labour government were in power today, there would be no plan B. And I can tell you that, very easily. Our annual deficit at 8.8% of the size of the economy is the largest in the European Union. It's bigger than Italy, it's bigger than Spain's, it's bigger than Greece's. It is the largest. And our national debt, that's the accumulated sum of debt, is now moving, towards the 100% mark, where, as I say, the markets get very, very worried, but also moving towards the kind of territory in which people like the Italians are. Now, you may think that the government's policies have been an absolute failure. The success of the government's policy is that the government is still borrowing at 2%, and the Greeks and the Italians and the Spanish are borrowing at 5%, and the difference between those two positions is between sustainability and catastrophe. And that's how they have to measure their success. But any idea that the austerity is going to be let up in any way is for the birds. It's absolutely not going to happen. The other remarkable thing about the economy in the last few years is that we've had, because we're not in the euro, we've had the opportunity of a massive devaluation of sterling, which has occurred, about 25% on a trade-weighted basis. We have had the opportunity to pump out money. So you've had these successive bouts of what's called quantitative easing, where the government goes out there and buys its own gilts, flooding the market really with money. And the response from the British economy has been pretty close to zilch. Nothing has happened. We have not seen a great roar of export activity as the currency has been devalued. Neither have we seen a great stimulus of demand as this amount of money has been injected into the economy. And this tells us that there are things that are fundamentally wrong, in my view, fundamentally wrong with the British economy. If you have a 25% devaluation and nothing happens to your exports, it must be that you're not creating the goods and services that the world wants to buy. Of course, in a context of a recession in financial services, but what about the rest of the economy? Why isn't that out there? And the more that I think about this, the more that I believe this has to be linked to the structures of our society, and in particular to education. Lots of people say, manufacturing has declined too much, we don't make anything anymore in this country. What we need to do somehow is expand the size of the manufacturing sector. And they say that as though this could be a top-down process, as though you could make a declaration that the manufacturing sector is going to be bigger. I suspect, actually, that it is really a bottom-up process. In other words, if you produce enough people who are sufficiently well qualified to move through and make those industries thrive, that's how you get those sectors beginning to expand. I have read in preparation for today Her Majesty's Chief Inspector's report into skills and learning. I mean, the first thing to say is further education is a remarkable sector. It is enormous. It is dealing with millions of people, both adolescent and adult, and it is providing huge numbers of opportunities for those people and a very large number of qualifications. However, the report is pretty clear that not all is well. There are not sufficient numbers of courses that are rated as good or outstanding. There certainly, I think, there aren't any colleges in that report that are rated as outstanding. And you see some tendencies in further education, which I'm afraid are replicated really now throughout British society, which is a tendency for a tick-box culture rather than an understanding of what it is that your clients actually require. So the tick-box culture is about making sure that people are getting qualifications, but according to the report, without sufficient reference as to whether those qualifications are respected, whether they're the things that people actually need, whether they relate to local labour markets. Now, I would be the first to say that the importance of an education is not to be assessed only in terms of employability, but my goodness, at a time when we've got 20% youth unemployment, employability has to be one of our very important factors. And it certainly isn't enough for us to relax and say, well, that's okay, we've sent these people forth with vocational qualifications, or we've sent them forth with GCSEs, or we've done something about their arithmetical and English language skills, but we haven't actually prepared them for a job which they're able to find in the locality. And by the way, of course, because of the problems that we have in the housing market and so on, I think mobility is strongly reduced during this period, and so it's much more difficult for people to move to the work, and therefore we need to have particular regard to preparing people for work that is close by. But this is also, I think, characteristic of a national malaise in a broader sense, which is, I think, that we have massively made our education system up to the age of 16 and beyond overly academic. So the emphasis of this government, the emphasis of previous governments, has been on GCSEs. Of course, the previous government, and I think governments even before that, created new vocational qualifications. I fear probably far too many vocational qualifications. I think it must be very difficult for employers to weave their way through the alphabeti spaghetti kind of mass of these vocational qualifications. But in any case, putting all of those many vocational qualifications together, they add up to really rather a small proportion of the qualifications that are being taken in total by young people in the age range. So they really don't seem to have got hold, and the emphasis continues to be on GCSE, to be on pretty academic subjects. Compounding that, of course, has been a policy which I must say I think was very ill-conceived, which was the idea of trying to drive 50% of our population towards university. One of the extraordinary things about Britain, one of the extraordinary things about British debate, despite our famous free press and despite our magnificent institutions like the BBC, is a tendency to be almost entirely ignorant of what goes on in other countries. And even if we do know what goes on in other countries, to decide that what other countries do is inapplicable to us. But, you know, if you begin to look at neighbouring countries that do very well, Germany, of course, is a prime example, we find that in Germany, youth unemployment is 8%, whereas here it's 20%. By the way, European Union average about 22%, so Britain's slightly better than the average, and some countries, of course, appalling figures, 50% in Spain, 50% in Greece. But the fact that we are only 2/5 as bad as Spain and Greece does not strike me as being a particular reason for celebration. So in Germany, if I understand this correctly, about 30% of the population is going to university. What a very surprising thought, that this magnificently successful German economy has a smaller proportion of its people going to university than here. And of course, we come to the subject of apprenticeships in Germany. More young people choose to go on apprenticeships in Germany than choose to go on to university. Just that single figure. 1.8 million apprenticeships in Germany, 400,000 apprenticeships here in the United Kingdom. And that is a numeric comparison without a qualitative comparison. But I suspect that the qualitative comparison would be even more depressing, because I fear that still today many of our apprenticeships are very short-term. There might be 1 year. They very often do not lead to employment with the employer, whereas typically 9 out of 10 German apprentices then take a job with their employer. And another lot within the 1 in 10 who don't take a job with that employer might at least do some temporary work with that employer. By the way, it appears that the cost of Germany's 1.8 million apprenticeships is less than the cost of our 400,000 apprenticeships. You know, you really wonder how we have managed to pull off these tricks. Now, I think the question that was up there before was, can we transform further education without transforming the role of the state? And I think my answer to this is no. I give this answer reluctantly because, the idea of yet more change must be very, very off-putting to people in this room. But I suspect that what we have going on here is not just a kind of, some casual failures around the edge. I think we have some real structural issues. We are presently educating people to 16. And whatever the government may say, whatever other people may say about the parity of esteem between vocational qualifications and GCSE, we know that all the political effort, all the political emphasis is on GCSE. We now have an extraordinary situation, surely, where the school leaving age is going to be increased to 18, and the qualification that everybody's focused on is at 16. So what are the last 2 years about? This is an extraordinary situation to get ourselves into. Of course, the last 2 years are about A-level for people who do A-levels, but lots of people don't do A-levels, so the question absolutely remains. I went to a grammar school, and I must say I was immensely disappointed when my magnificent grammar school, which in my year sent 22 people to Oxford and Cambridge, 21 of them on exhibitions and scholarships. I was extremely sorry when my grammar school was abolished. My analysis would have been that the grammar schools were really very successful and the secondary moderns were really pretty unsuccessful, and that the age at which the decision was made between the two, age 11, was inappropriate because it was just too early in a person's life. So, looking at what's happened since, I'm very broadly speaking, because there are many exceptions to what I'm saying, but I fear, as we observe from the fall in social mobility, as we observe the way that more and more the public schools are dominating the top universities. Remember, the original intention in the 1944 Education Act was a tripartite arrangement: grammar schools, modern schools, and technical schools. Technical schools hardly took off and hardly featured in it. So what I'm coming round to is we were selecting between pupils too early, and we weren't making decent provision for kids who are non-academic. But surely it's not beyond our imaginations to be able to think about a later period in a young person's life. It might be around the age of 14, where we begin to see what the propensities, skills, talents, orientations of that young person are. And to make sure that if they are not academic, that the provision for the non-academic is absolutely outstanding. Many of the things that we require as a society are not academic skills. I mean, I now work in the media. My goodness, this is a wonderful industry for us. We need people in the media. We are outstanding in the field. I'm talking about everything from theatre through television to cinema. But very often the people we need there are not academic. In the performing arts, they're not academic. This is a country which apparently still turns its nose up at things like engineering. You referred, John, to my railway programs. I mean, engineering, an outstanding achievement of this country, an absolutely uplifting and inspiring vocation. And yet somehow people in this country are not motivated by it. And we need people with wonderful manual skills and drafting skills and skills of invention, imagination, design. And somehow, in our comprehensive system, we've made a decision that all young people must be regarded as the same, which is absurd. They are clearly very, very different. We've decided that they must be educated in much the same way, which is clearly absurd because they ought to be educated in different ways. And we've decided that the kind of gold stick of the whole thing is an academic qualification, the GCSE, which seems to me absurd and to leave a whole lot of people in the dark. And so, for all these reasons, my answer to the question, can it be done without the transformation of the state. No, it absolutely needs the transformation of the state. It needs a cultural change. What goes on in Germany, of course, is not just a governmental thing. It is very largely a company thing. It is the absolute engagement of the enterprise sector in the business of educating young people in the crafts and skills that they need. It is a national enterprise, and it requires a cultural change. Unfortunately, we seem to be a pretty long way from some of these achievements. I must sit down within my time. I just want to tell you that I've had a rather extraordinary career. I don't know why I've been invited here, for example, but you know, my career started in politics. First thing I did was I briefed Margaret Thatcher for her press conferences in 1979 at the general election when she came to office, and my job was to make sure she was prepared for anything that might come up. So each morning I'd read the newspapers, watch television, listen to the radio, and then present Margaret Thatcher with a dossier of bad news every morning to make sure she was prepared. And this was more or less tantamount to a suicide mission, really, because her reaction was always somewhere between explosive and thermonuclear. You know, she was a guard like a rock. But someone took me aside and said, "Don't worry, you're doing a great job, because, you know, in the privacy of that little room, in the intimacy of that morning meeting, Margaret Thatcher can lose her temper in private before then going into the press conference and losing her temper in public." So very, very, very important rehearsal. But now I make documentaries. I'm in the entertainment business. And recently I was making a documentary about meerkats. You know meerkats? No? Yeah. Cute, would you say? Cute? They are dictatorial little bastards. Because what happens is that in any group of 20 meerkats, a dominant female emerges, Maureen. And this dominant female handbags her way to the top. She drives the other females into the Kalahari Desert, where they may well perish. She may eat the pups of the other females to establish a monopoly on breeding. And then, gentlemen, an extraordinary thing happens. The testosterone level of the dominant female rises, and the testosterone levels of all the males in the group fall. And this has led me to a much more thorough understanding of Margaret Thatcher's government than I had ever had before. Thank you very much for your attention.